Week 14 of the 2024 fantasy football season is getting ready to fire up in just a couple hours, so you know exactly what we're going to do. We're going to go over 6 things that you need to know before you set your final roster heading into the most important week of fantasy football yet on the entire season. We got 6 teams on bye week. We got tons of injuries. Let's break down what you need to know for week 14 of the fantasy season. All right, so let's start with the fact that Kenneth Walker is out as he is dealing with both a calf and ankle injury going into week 14. I mean, this seems to be the tale of Kenneth Walker year after year. Starts off super hot, maybe he's a little bit banged up early as well, but then keeps going. Maybe misses 1 or 2 games, has a lot of high ceiling games, and then the Seattle Seahawks offensive line fails him, and those injuries keep lingering. He plays at a lower ceiling, and then he starts to miss more time, right? Very frustrating for Kenneth Walker owners, but he is going to be out in a pretty good matchup against the Arizona Cardinals on the road this week, who are allowing the 18th most fantasy points to the running back position, which means that Zach Charbonnet, who at the time I'm recording this is sitting at 55% rostered, will be the starting running back for the Seattle Seahawks in this important matchup on the road here in week 14 against the Arizona Cardinals. Don't forget, the Seattle Seahawks currently sit atop of that division. So this is a huge divisional matchup, both for the Cardinals and the Seahawks. The Seahawks to try to secure the number 1 spot for now and for the rest of this division, because this division at the end of the day is still pretty much wide open. But let's take a look at Zach Charbonnet here. Don't forget, early in the season, right? Kenneth Walker missed weeks 2 and 3 of the season. In week 2, Zach Charbonnet as a starting running back for the Seahawks, 17.9 fantasy points, 38 yards on the ground, a touchdown, and 5 receptions for 31 receiving yards. Week 3 against Miami Dolphins, 25.7 fantasy points, 18 touches, 91 yards on the ground, 2 rushing touchdowns, 3 catches for 16 receiving yards. And kind of sporadically throughout the season, we have seen some standalone value for Zach Charbonnet as well, including this past week against the Jets, where he did have a rushing touchdown, 28 yards on the ground, 2 catches for 13 receiving yards, and 12.1 fantasy points. So Zach Charbonnet has been a pretty serviceable running back when he's filled in for Kenneth Walker. So, like I said, he sits at 55% rostered. We got 6 teams on bye week. We got all kinds of injuries mounting up here at the end of the week. If Charbonnet's out there and you need to roll with them here in the second part of the Biocalypse in the 2024 fantasy football season, fire him up. He is a very startable running back as we get into week 14's action. All right, and speaking of injuries, Breece Hall is also going to miss week 14. He is out with that knee injury that has been kind of confusing over the past couple weeks. Apparently happened in week 11 in that big game he had against the Colts with 31.1 fantasy points, and the Jets had a bye week. And there were kind of rumors about this knee injury and him not being disclosed and all this murky stuff. It's kind of questionable going into week 13. Then he played. He only had 6 fantasy points. He was at least decent in that game, 5 yards per carry. Just wasn't a great fantasy day for him. And now he's out in week 14. And I'm pretty worried about Breece Hall owners for the remainder of the season, unless, of course, you do own Braylon Allen, who we'll talk about in a second here, because I do think there's a chance if and when the Jets are eliminated from playoff contention that Breece Hall just gets shut down for the remainder of the season. I don't get why they would necessarily risk a player of Breece Hall's caliber if they have no shot at the playoffs. But technically, at the time of recording this, they are still in the playoff race. They had like a 1% chance of making the playoffs, but I guess that is enough of a chance. So if they beat the Miami Dolphins on the road here in week 14, then I don't quite know what's going to happen with Breece Hall. But at the same time, if Braylon Allen comes through and has a strong performance, which he definitely can, as the Miami Dolphins are allowing the 22nd most fantasy points to running backs, then maybe that also leads to Breece Hall missing time for the remainder of the season. I don't know what's going to happen with Breece Hall. I don't think any of us really do. But what we do know is that Braylon Allen should be able to fill in and be a very startable running back for the time being. He has moved up to 59% rostered at the time I'm recording this. The video I put out early yesterday morning, he started at 40% rostered. By the time I finished editing that video, he was at 53% rostered. By the time this video releases and waivers clear for Sunday, he'll be even higher rostered, I'm sure. But listen, we've only seen these kind of like sparks out of Braylon Allen, right? I mean, he had that big game in week 2 against Tennessee where Breece Hall was fully healthy. And outside of that, like the next week, he got some additional touches because the Jets were blowing out the Patriots. But, we saw a rushing touchdown in week 8 and also against the Patriots. But that's really about it for Braylon Allen on the season. Outside of that moments, he's been nothing but a handcuff. But if you've held on to Braylon Allen, this is what you've been waiting for. And I think we full send Braylon Allen this week. I am all for starting Braylon Allen on the road here against the Dolphins. I do have some concerns, sure, about this Jets offense today. And, this is a great Miami Dolphins pass defense, and I'm worried about the Jets offense in general. I think most people are, but this should be a solid outing for Braylon Allen. And if he's able to suit up to finish the fantasy season, this is a schedule we've been talking about all season long in our trade videos and our league winning moves videos throughout the season. Breece Hall was going in the fantasy playoffs with one of the very best strength of schedules. The Jacksonville Jaguars, the LA Rams, who have improved against the run but are still not great, and the Buffalo Bills. So if Braylon Allen is the guy here, he could end up being a true league winner. If he is out there and available in your respective league, you have to pick him up. I mean, really, like even in like 10-team leagues, you got to consider going out and getting Braylon Allen. He's going to be a very good start over the next couple of weeks. Now, what we do have to consider here is that we do have Isaiah Davis, who some people are also looking at. He had 3 catches, 28 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown, 12.2 fantasy points in week 13. People are going to bring that up, but I'm not going to read too much into one receiving touchdown and just a couple catches. I mean, he only had 1 total carry, so he'll probably be the RB2 here, but this should be Braylon Allen's backfield in week 14 and maybe in the following weeks. We'll see what happens with Breece Hall, but what you need to know most importantly this week, if you do own Braylon Allen, I think he's a great start. Depending on who you have, he's definitely a player who can make your starting lineup, and you can definitely feel confident. And if you have him, don't get rid of him because he could end up being a true league winner. I'm willing to head straight to Underdog and risk taking Braylon Allen to score a rushing touchdown this week. Like I said, this Miami Dolphins defense, they're good against the pass, but they have really struggled against the run. I think Braylon Allen to score a touchdown or maybe over 53.5 rushing yards are both solid lines on Underdog. If you guys don't already know, Underdog is giving all new users who sign up with promo code TheCatch, that link is down below, a free NFL Pick'em to use towards Week 14's action. Take your free Pick'em. Take Braylon Allen to score a rushing touchdown against the Dolphins this week. When both of those lines hit, you'll automatically triple your cash entry. And as long as you guys sign up with that promo code, TheCatch, that link is down below, you'll also receive a 50% deposit match up to $1,000 on Underdog. Next thing that you need to know is that Malik Nabers is going into week 14 as questionable, dealing with a hip injury. And he did end up having an MRI on the hip, and we still don't really know the full details here. Don't really know how bad it is. Luckily, this is one of the early games of the day, and I think Nabers going into this matchup is a perfectly fine start. I know we got Drew Lock at quarterback, but Nabers had 15.3 fantasy points this past week against Dallas with Lock at quarterback, 13 targets, 8 catches, 69 receiving yards. He's given you 10 or more fantasy points in every game since week 8, and double digits every game this year except for week 7 in a tough matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles, right? So, like, Nabers is one of these players who I've encouraged you guys to keep starting. He has a safe floor. The upside's kind of capped here, but the floor is safe, right? And, I think if he plays, he can feel confident in firing him up because the Saints have allowed the 27th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. And he's another player who has a fantastic playoff schedule that we've been talking about in terms of trades and league winning moves and all that for the past couple of weeks. Baltimore, Atlanta, Indianapolis. This is one of the very best playoff schedules. But once again, this is a situation where if this is risking like a long-term injury, the Giants aren't one of these teams who really need to risk a rookie star wide receiver the rest of the season. So this is definitely a situation to pay attention to. And if he does end up playing this week, I'm completely fine playing him. But if he doesn't play, what does that mean for the rest of the Giants? Well, I mean, you got Rondell Robinson, right? You got Darius Slayton. This is a great matchup. Somebody could step up here, but I just don't think it's worth risking it. Even in a week where we got all these injuries and 6 teams on bye weeks, I'm steering clear of trying to stream one of these other Giants wide receivers. And I will say, if Nabers doesn't play, I do get a little concerned overall for this Giants offense. Like, it's a good matchup for Tyrone Tracy, but what is really going to be the spirit here for the Giants offense? How much are they really going to move the football? Saints defense, not great, but the Saints defense has a lot of upside going into this matchup with Locke at quarterback and a questionable Nabers. So we will see what happens here, but I'm not going to go out and try and play Robinson or Slayton. If Nabers plays this week, I'm good with starting him. But if he doesn't, I'm definitely concerned for Malik Nabers and his status for the rest of the season as we move into the fantasy playoffs. All right, next thing that you need to know is that DeVonta Smith is going to be playing this week. He is off the injury report. We missed him the past 2 weeks as he has dealt with that hamstring injury. At least some of us have missed him because in the previous 2 games where he was active, he had 6.9 or less fantasy points for 2 straight games and 2 high ceiling games against Jacksonville and Cincinnati, but then kind of that goose egg game against the Giants was 0.8 fantasy points. But you guys have followed this channel for some time. You guys know that I've been a DeVonta Smith truther for years, and I do trust DeVonta Smith going into this matchup. Depends on what you got, though. I did say this in last night's stream, the Panthers have not been that bad against wide receivers. As you guys see on the screen, they give up the 11th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. But part of that, you also got to think about the fact that they give up the most fantasy points to tight ends and running backs, and their bottom 5 against quarterbacks. So, teams don't always need to throw against the Panthers, but they are pretty good against wide receivers, and this defense has been a little bit better in the past couple weeks, right? But ultimately, the offense has also been better. And I do think that there's potential here for the Panthers to push back a little bit. I am far more concerned about the Panthers this week, don't get me wrong, against the Eagles on the road in comparison to the Bucks and the Chiefs this past week. As I talked about, Panthers will probably be okay in the past 2 weeks, right? And they're not necessarily one of these teams who we just have to sit everybody and we just start defenses against them and all that stuff. But I will say this Eagles team makes me a little bit more scared for the Panthers than any team they've faced in recent weeks. But nonetheless, if you own DeVonta Smith, just remember he has 14.9 or more fantasy points in every game this year, except for 3. He's averaging 13 fantasy points per game. So if you're in a position, due to the bye weeks, due to the injuries, where you're like, man, DeVonta Smith, do I trust him? I say you guys go ahead and roll with him. Of course, a player coming back from injury, their first week back, I'm usually a little bit cautious. And like I said, this matchup isn't as good as it may seem, but this is a tough week. A lot of injured players, a lot of teams on bye. So if you got to roll with DeVonta Smith, don't overthink it. I still think he could give you guys a solid floor going into week 14. All right, next thing that you need to know is that we have both DJ Moore and DeAndre Swift going into this week as questionable. They are both dealing with a quad injury. And I will say this one makes me a little bit nervous, not just for DJ Moore and DeAndre Swift owners, but this will be a big knock to this Bears offense, who still on paper have a bit of a tough matchup against the Niners, although right now this Niners defense does not really intimidate me. But DJ Moore has been great over the past 3 weeks since Shane Waldron has been fired. He has 13.7 or more fantasy points in every single game and 23.7 or more in his last 2 games and a touchdown in his last 2 games. It's a bit of a tough matchup on paper. As you see on the screen, the Niners have allowed the 9th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, but once again, it doesn't really scare me, the state of this Niners team right now. So I'm a tad bit worried about DJ Moore, but the reports are saying that he's optimistic he will play this week. So if DJ Moore plays, I'm good to go with DJ Moore. If he doesn't, then you're going to see an uptick in volume for both Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze. And Keenan Allen's been great over the past 3 weeks as well. So definitely pay attention to this one, whether you're a DJ Moore owner or a Keenan Allen owner. And then potentially, if you're in a tough spot and you own Rome Odunze, he could be in line for more work this week. But we'll see what happens here. I'm more optimistic due to the reports about DJ Moore, but I am concerned about DeAndre Swift, right? I had him in the sneaky starts video because this is a great matchup against the Niners, and some people are coming through like he's not even playing. Well, we still don't quite know, right? At the time of recording this, he is still listed as questionable, and the sneaky starts video came out Friday, right? So this is a great matchup, and he's been playing at a bit of a lower ceiling because the passing game has been so much better over the last 2 weeks, 9.5 or less fantasy points in 2 straight games. But he did have 16.4 fantasy points, a touchdown, 71 yards on the ground in his first game with the change at offensive coordinator against Green Bay at home in Week 11. So I think if Swift plays, we can still have confidence because this matchup is really good. And I think the Bears come out and have a really good day against the Niners. So we'll see what happens with Swift. But if he doesn't play, Roschon Johnson, is also out with a concussion. So that's going to leave Travis Homer as a starting running back. And even if Swift plays, you might still see a lot of touches to Homer. So I'm a little bit concerned about this situation. It's tough because it's such a good matchup. The Niners have really, really started to be just awful against the run. But what kind of like committee are we going to see? Even if Swift is healthy, and then if Swift doesn't play, do we trust Travis Homer? I definitely trust, Braylon Allen, Zach Charbonnet, those guys we talked about at the beginning of the video. If Roschon Johnson was active, like, I'd trust him, but it's just kind of tough here, right? And then you've got Darrington Evans as well, who just got activated or elevated to the active roster like 8 hours from the time I'm filming this. So I don't know exactly what we're going to get, but I am concerned about this Bears backfield, but it just sucks because it is such a fantastic matchup this week. So we'll see what happens. We should know by kickoff what's going to happen with DJ Moore and DeAndre Swift, but it definitely will bring a ton of fantasy implications whether these two players are active today or not. And last but not least, you guys need to know that Bucky Irving is expected to play, although he has a hip injury. Don't forget, guys, he did go through the week as questionable, and at the time I'm recording this, he's still listed as questionable. I know some of you guys had some concerns in last night's stream, but don't worry about Bucky Irving. Bucky Irving looked better after he suffered the hip injury against the Panthers last week. He had it on the kick return right before half, and he played better in the second half of the game, although he got some more opportunities than he did in the first half. And just don't forget, he has 27.2 or more fantasy points in 2 straight games, double digits in every game except for 2 since week 3 on the season. Bucky Irving has been a must-start for weeks now. He's been my must-start running back for the past 2 weeks on the channel, and it is a tougher matchup than you might think. The Raiders have improved against the run, now allowing the 16th fewest fantasy points to running backs, but it's still a good enough matchup. The Buccaneers are at home right now. They have a chance to overtake this division as the season starts to wrap up. This is a team that's going to be giving it every single thing they have every single week, and Bucky Irving is absolutely humming, so do not be too concerned about this hip injury. Bucky Irving is still an absolute must-start running back. It's definitely possible that my guy, Rachaad White, does get some more involvement to kind of try and keep Bucky Irving fresh and everything, as, like I said, the Bucs try and make this playoff run. And, Rachaad White has still had that complimentary role over the past couple of weeks, and still, like, between weeks 7 and 10, was heavily involved. And really in the past 2 weeks, he has still had 12 or more touches in the past 2 games. So, and a touchdown in just, 2 weeks ago against the Giants. So Rachaad White is still very involved, and who knows, maybe we'll see Sean Tucker pop up as well. But Bucky Irving remains a must-start running back. He's a great flex option. He's a great RB2 option. Don't overthink this one, guys. If you own Bucky Irving, you have to keep rolling with him. Don't let the hip injury fool you as we go into week 14. And that'll do it for today's video. There are 6 things that you need to know as we head into week 14 of the 2024 fantasy football season. As always, guys, I'm going to answer as many fantasy football questions as I possibly can in the comment section down below. So if you guys need anything whatsoever, be sure to drop me a comment. I'll answer as many comments before kickoff as I possibly can. And more importantly, make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel, because we're going to have every single thing you guys will need to help you guys dominate the rest of the fantasy season and bring home that championship here into the 2024 fantasy football season. So be sure you are subscribed so that you don't miss out on any of the content. And with that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.